I want you to imagine, just for a second, a place on Earth where there is no day.
Right.
And I don't mean a place where it's, currently nighttime or a valley with really heavy cloud cover.
Right.
I'm not even talking about a deep cave system where you can eventually turn around and walk back out to the entrance.
Exactly.
I want you to imagine a place where there has never been a day. Not once. A place where, since the formation of the planet, sunlight has simply given up before it could ever reach the ground.
It is a really difficult concept for the human mind to truly process. I mean, our entire biological rhythm, our circadian clocks, agriculture, our entire civilization, it's all built entirely around the presence of the sun.
Yeah, complete.
We are fundamentally creatures of light. But the physical reality of our planet is that the light we rely on so heavily is actually a profoundly limited resource.
Right.
It can only penetrate a tiny fraction of the Earth's available living space.
And that boundary line, where the light finally fails, that is the starting point for our mission on today's deep dive. We have a massive stack of research on the table today.
Really do.
Yeah, everything from oceanographic surveys and submersible dive logs to the latest genetic sequencing papers on deep sea biology. And our goal is to take all this data and take you on a literal descent, meter by meter, straight down into the single largest habitat in the known universe.
It's quite the journey.
It really is. We are exploring a completely alien world right here on our own planet. And the crazy part of digging through all these papers is realizing that we have looked at this environment less than we have mapped the surface of Mars.
Oh, absolutely.
Like, we have high-definition panoramas of Martian craters, but we've photographed less of our own deep ocean than the far side of the moon.
It represents the ultimate paradox of human exploration, doesn't it? I mean, we are constantly looking up at the stars, building these incredibly sophisticated space telescopes to find potential alien biospheres.
Right, spending billions of dollars.
Exactly. While simultaneously ignoring a biosphere that is larger than every rainforest, desert, and grassland on Earth combined. It is sitting right beneath our boats.
Yeah.
And as we go through this material today, a central theme emerges from the biology. The deeper we go, the more the creatures living there are forced to abandon the normal rules of life. What might look to you or me like an absolute nightmare is, well, biologically speaking, a masterclass in survival.
Okay, let's unpack this. Because if we're going to understand how biology pulls off this masterclass, we have to start at the surface and work our way down.
Makes sense.
We are leaving the familiar postcard blue ocean behind. You know the one, right? The ocean with the bright coral reefs, the surfing videos, the visible shafts of sunlight cutting through the water. We're leaving that.
We are.
We are going to descend just 200 meters. For context, if you're visualizing this, that is roughly the height of a 60-story building. And immediately, the physics of the water change the environment. The bright, vibrant blue starts to deepen into this very dark, heavy, bruise-colored water, and the temperature just plummets.
You are entering the beginning of the mesopelagic zone, or as is more commonly known, the twilight zone.
The twilight zone.
Yeah, and that nickname is scientifically fitting because it's not entirely dark yet. A small fraction of surface light exists here, but it is failing rapidly.
Right.
And the mechanics of how it fails really dictate the evolution of everything living there. You have to remember, water is incredibly dense compared to air, and it absorbs different wavelengths of light at different rates.
I was reading about this in the physics breakdown. It's not just a uniform dimming, right?
Exactly. It's a selective filtering. Red light, which has a longer wavelength and lower energy, cannot penetrate water effectively. It vanishes almost completely within the first 10 meters. Orange and yellow wavelengths follow soon after. By the time you hit that 60-story mark at 200 meters, all the warm colors are gone. All that is left to filter down is a very thin, very weak thread of high-energy blue light.
And reading through the ecological studies of this zone, that thin thread of blue light is what creates the brutal rule of the realm. Down here, just having that tiny bit of ambient light makes the environment incredibly dangerous.
It really does.
It almost seems like it would be safer if it were just pitch black.
In many ways, it would be. In the twilight zone, light is both your only tool and an absolute death sentence. You have to put yourself in the perspective of the animals living there. Almost every single creature in this zone is locked in a perpetual cycle of hunting and being hunted.
At the same time.
Often simultaneously, yes.
Yeah.
In this dim, blue-tinted water, your greatest vulnerability isn't your speed or your armor. It is your shadow.
Your shadow.
Right. If you swim above a predator and your solid body blocks that faint downwelling blue light coming from the surface, the predator looking up will see your black silhouette against the slightly lighter blue background.
So it's basically a game of underwater silhouetting. Which makes me wonder, if I'm a fish living there and any shadow I cast instantly gives away my position to a predator looking up, how on earth do I counter that?
It's a massive evolutionary problem.
Right, because you can't just stop casting a shadow if you're a solid object in the water.
Well, you can't stop casting a shadow through normal physical means. No. So you have to manipulate the light itself. The defense mechanism the ocean has engineered is to literally become the light.
Become the light.
When marine biologists sample this zone, they find that roughly 90% of the animals living below 200 meters have evolved the ability to produce their own light.
90%?
Yeah, through a chemical reaction called bioluminescence. We tend to view bioluminescence as this rare magical anomaly, right? Like a firefly blinking on a summer night in the woods.
Yeah, like a novelty.
But in the twilight zone, it is not a novelty. It is the absolute default state of existence. From a planetary perspective, we surface dwellers are the ones who are strange for not glowing.
Let's dig into the chemistry of that for a second, because it's not just magic glowing dust. I was looking at the biochemistry sections in the research, and this light production requires a highly specific metabolic pathway.
It's a very precise reaction.
They are mixing a light-emitting molecule called luciferin with an enzyme called luciferase. And when those two interact in the presence of oxygen, it triggers a reaction that releases photons light with almost zero heat.
Yes, cold light.
It's essentially perfectly efficient cold light.
That chemical efficiency is vital because energy is precious down there. And the animal that utilizes this luciferin reaction more successfully than almost anything else on the planet is one that most people have never even heard of.
Right.
It isn't a giant squid or a great white shark. If there is a true ruler of the twilight zone, it is a small, rather ordinary-looking silvery fish called the lanternfish.
The numbers on the lanternfish absolutely broke my brain when I was looking at the data.
They are staggering.
The oceanographic surveys estimate there are over 250 different species of them, but it's their sheer volume that is terrifying. If you were to somehow scoop up and weigh every single deep-sea fish in every ocean on Earth, the lanternfish would make up an estimated 65% of that total planetary biomass.
Yes.
65%. They dominate the deep ocean by sheer weight.
They are arguably the most abundant vertebrate on the planet, and they achieve that staggering success primarily through their mastery of bioluminescence.
Wow.
They get their name from spiralized light-producing organs called photophores that run in specific rows along their bellies and their sides.
And the research highlights a fascinating evolutionary quirk about those. Those photophore patterns are completely unique to each species.
Very true.
They're so distinct that marine biologists cataloging them can look at the specific arrangement of the glowing dots and know exactly which of the 250 species they are holding.
It functions as a luminescent fingerprint, which likely aids in finding appropriate mates in the dim water.
Right, like name tags.
Exactly. But reproduction is really a secondary benefit. The primary critical function of those belly photophores is a camouflage technique known as counterillumination.
Here is how I mentally pictured this counterillumination when I was reading about it, and you can tell me if this tracks.
Go for it.
Imagine you are driving a car at night through incredibly thick fog. Usually your headlights cut a visible beam through that fog and your car casts a dark shadow behind it.
Right.
But imagine if your headlights and taillights were engineered to perfectly match the exact color, temperature, and brightness of the ambient fog surrounding you. You match it so perfectly that your car casts no shadow whatsoever and visually dissolves into the mist.
That's a great way to put it.
You become completely invisible to anyone looking in your direction.
That is an exceptionally accurate analogy. The lanternfish is actively erasing its own silhouette. When a predator, let's say a larger fish, looks up toward the surface, it is trying to spot the dark shape of prey, blocking that faint blue light. But the lanternfish is firing its downward-facing photophores. It adjusts the intensity of its own bioluminescence to exactly match the intensity of the downwelling surface light.
It's actively tuning it.
Continuously. The predator looks up, sees what it thinks is just the unbroken blue light of the surface, and swims right past. The lanternfish has achieved biological invisibility.
And they don't just passively float there using this invisibility cloak. They use it to participate in what the data says is the largest daily migration on Earth.
It is.
Which again blew my mind because I always default to thinking of the great wildebeest migration in the Serengeti or millions of monarch butterflies. But the greatest migration is a vertical one happening in the ocean every single day.
The diel vertical migration. As the sun sets and darkness covers the surface of the ocean, billions upon billions of these lanternfish leave the relative safety of the twilight zone and swim hundreds of meters upward to the surface waters.
Just moving straight up.
Straight up. They do this to feed on the nutrient-rich plankton that gather near the surface. But the crucial part of this migration is timing.
Right, because of the sun.
Yes. The absolute second they sense the sun beginning to rise, they turn around and sink rapidly back down into the depths.
Because if they stay too long, their invisibility cloak breaks. If the sun gets too bright, their chemical photophores simply can't generate enough light to match full daylight.
They'd be completely exposed.
Their shadows would return, and they'd be sitting ducks for tuna or dolphins. They are trapped in this relentless daily commute, driven entirely by the fear of light.
Precisely. The physics of light dictates their entire behavioral ecology. But, evolution is never a static game of defense.
Never.
If the lanternfish represents the ultimate defensive adaptation manipulating light to hide, then the ecosystem inevitably produces a predator that weaponizes the exact same physics to break those defenses, which introduces one of the most highly specialized hunters in the ocean, the dragonfish.
Oh, man. Let's talk about the dragonfish, because looking at the morphology charts in this research,
it's a monster. Quite intimidating.
It is a small fish, usually no longer than 15 centimeters. So we are talking roughly the length of a ballpoint pen. But if you scaled this thing up to the size of a human, it would look like something out of a sci-fi horror film.
Definitely alien looking.
Its jaw is completely detached from the standard cranial structure, allowing it to unhinge and open wider than its own head. And the teeth? They are so elongated and thin that they are virtually transparent.
And that transparency is not an accident. It's a refractive adaptation.
Really?
Yes. In the faint blue light of the twilight zone, a solid white tooth would reflect photons and give away the predator's position before it could strike.
Oh, wow. I didn't even think about the teeth reflecting light.
Exactly. By evolving teeth with a crystalline structure that lets light pass through, the dragonfish ensures that a lanternfish won't see the trap closing until the teeth have already pierced its body. Furthermore, the dragonfish has evolved supplementary teeth on the roof of its mouth that curve backward toward its throat.
Like a one-way street.
Precisely. Once the jaw snaps shut, any struggling or thrashing by the prey only forces it deeper into the digestive tract.
It is a perfect mechanical trap. But the mechanical trap isn't even the wildest part. It's how the dragonfish finds its prey in the first place. Like many deep-sea predators, it has a bioluminescent lure dangling from its chin on a little filament.
A classic deep-sea feature.
Right. But diving into the biochemistry of this specific fish reveals a massive aha moment. Almost everything in the twilight zone glows blue or green.
Yes.
They do this because blue and green wavelengths travel the furthest in water, and consequently, over millions of years, the eyes of almost every single deep-sea creature have evolved to only possess visual pigments that can detect blue and green light.
They are essentially completely colorblind to the rest of the spectrum. Red light doesn't penetrate from the surface, so there was never any evolutionary pressure to build the complex retinal proteins required to see red. To a lanternfish, red is not a color. It is a void. It is simply nothing.
Right, and that is the loophole the dragonfish exploits. Because the research shows that the dragonfish is one of the only deep-sea predators that has evolved the chemical ability to both produce and see red bioluminescence.
It's incredible.
It has this specialized organ under its eyes called a suborbital photophore that emits a deep red beam.
It's an astonishing biochemical feat. To produce that red light, the dragonfish actually filters its own blue bioluminescence through a fluorescent pigment that absorbs the blue photons and re-emits them at a lower energy red wavelength.
Like putting a red gel over a stage light.
Very similar. And simultaneously, it has evolved a highly specialized visual pigment in its eyes, a derivative of chlorophyll, actually, which it likely acquires from eating copepods that ate surface algae, which allows it to perceive that red wavelength returning to its eye.
So if I'm putting all this together, the dragonfish is swimming around in what looks like pitch blackness to every other fish. It turns on its red spotlight. It sweeps that red beam across a lanternfish. The lanternfish's body reflects the red light back to the dragonfish. But because the lanternfish physically lacks the retinal receptors to see red, it has absolutely no idea it is lit up like a billboard.
Not at all.
The dragonfish has essentially invented biological night vision goggles.
What's fascinating here is that it is a private, invisible wavelength. The dragonfish can illuminate its prey, line up its strike, and attack a creature that believes it is perfectly hidden in complete darkness. It is an evolutionary cheat code that completely bypasses the lanternfish's counter-elimination defense.
Which makes me wonder, if you're a marine biologist studying this and you realize this fish is using a frequency of light that nothing else can see to wage this invisible war, it really makes you question what else we are missing.
It certainly does.
If there is a secret red light war happening right beneath us, how many other private, invisible biological languages are being spoken down there that our submersibles just aren't tuned to pick up?
It is a fundamental problem of observation. We can only measure what we build our instruments to detect. The dragonfish forces us to acknowledge that the deep ocean is likely filled with chemical signals, acoustic frequencies, and electromagnetic fields that are defining the ecosystem, and we are currently deaf and blind to them.
It really keeps you humble. But okay, so far we've got the lanternfish mastering the physics of light to hide, and the dragonfish hacking the biology of light to hunt. Just when I thought I had the rules of the Twilight Zone figured out, I hit the section of the research on the vampire squid.
Ah, yes.
And this creature just takes all the rules and throws them out the window.
Vampira tethys infernalis. The scientific binomial nomenclature literally translates from the Latin as the vampire squid from hell.
Which is an incredible name.
Yeah.
And looking at the photographs from the ROVs, you completely understand why the German biologist who named it in 1903 chose that moniker.
It looks the part.
It really does. It is a deep, velvety, blood red color. It has these 8 dark arms that are connected by a webbing of skin, making it look like it's wearing a Dracula cape. The inside of the cape is lined with these fleshy, menacing-looking spines called cirri.
Yes.
And it has these massive pale blue eyes. The anatomical charts note that proportionally to its body size, it has the largest eyes of any animal in the animal kingdom. It looks like the ultimate apex predator of the abyss. It looks built for violence.
Based on purely surface-level morphological assumptions, it certainly looks like a formidable hunter. But this is where the deep sea actively subverts our land-based intuition.
Okay.
The physiological reality of the vampire squid is that it is one of the most passive, gentle, and slow-moving animals in the entire ocean.
Really?
Yeah. It doesn't drink blood, it isn't technically a true squid, it occupies its own unique taxonomic order, and it doesn't actively hunt anything.
I have to pause on this because reading the ecological breakdown, it feels like a contradiction. How does an animal evolve to look like a spiky red demon, complete with a cape, but actually operates as a pacifist?
It's counterintuitive for sure.
If it isn't hunting, how is it surviving in a zone where everything is trying to eat everything else?
It survives through environmental evasion. The vampire squid has adapted its biochemistry to inhabit one of the most hostile microenvironments on the planet, a specific band within the water column known as the oxygen minimum zone, or OMZ.
I want to make sure I understand the mechanics of the OMZ. This is a layer of water where the biological decay of organic matter sinking from the surface uses up almost all the dissolved oxygen, right? So the water there is essentially suffocating.
Exactly. The oxygen saturation in the OMZ can drop below 3%. For the vast majority of marine life, swimming into this zone is a death sentence.
Wow.
Fast-moving predators, like sharks or predatory squid, have incredibly high metabolisms that demand constant, massive amounts of oxygen. If they chase prey into the OMZ, they will rapidly asphyxiate.
So the vampire squid looked at this toxic, suffocating layer of water and decided it was the perfect place to build a house. It basically found a room where the air is poisonous to all its enemies, walked inside, and locked the door behind it.
It traded the danger of predators for the danger of hypoxia. And to survive that hypoxia, it had to radically alter its internal chemistry. The vampire squid's blood utilizes a respiratory protein called hemocyanin, which is copper-based rather than iron-based.
Which gives it a blue tint.
Right. Exactly. It has evolved a highly specialized form of hemocyanin that binds to oxygen with incredible efficiency, allowing it to extract whatever microscopic traces of oxygen exist in the water.
But binding oxygen efficiently isn't enough on its own, right? You still have to conserve what you have, which explains why it's so passive.
Precisely. It purchased absolute safety from predators. But the biological invoice for that safety is extreme energy conservation. It cannot afford to swim fast. It cannot afford to wrestle with struggling prey. Its metabolic rate is the lowest of any cephalopod ever recorded. It essentially lives its entire life in a state closer to a hibernating bear than a typical squid. Which brings us to its diet. If you can't hunt and you can't expend any energy, what are you eating to sustain a body the size of a football? The research papers detail this process, and it is weirdly poetic. It eats something called marine snow. Marine snow is the foundational food source for the entire deep ocean. It is a constant, incredibly slow drift of detritus falling from the sunlit world thousands of meters above. We are talking about the decaying fragments of dead microscopic plants, shed zooplankton exoskeletons, biological waste, and sand grains, all clumped together by bacterial mucus.
So it's basically the dandruff and garbage of the surface ocean slowly sinking into the dark.
That's one way to look at it.
And the vampire squid, this creature named for hell, survives by floating completely still in toxic water, deploying two long, sticky, thread-like filaments from its body and just waiting for this garbage to stick to them.
Yes.
Once a sufficient amount of marine snow accumulates, it pulls the filament in, scrapes the debris off with its arms, rolls it into a little mucus pellet, and eats it.
It is the ultimate detritivore. It is a deep-sea garbage collector.
But what happens if a predator does manage to hold its breath and dive into the oxygen minimum zone? If a predatory fish spots the vampire squid, how does it defend itself without expending energy? It doesn't squirt a cloud of black ink like a normal squid, right?
Squirting black ink in total darkness would be entirely pointless, since the predator can't see it anyway. Instead, the vampire squid deploys bioluminescence, but not for camouflage. It releases a thick cloud of glowing bioluminescent mucus from the tips of its arms.
Glowing mucus.
It essentially throws a smoke bomb made of glowing blue light into the face of the predator, temporarily blinding or confusing them.
And while the predator is distracted by the glowing mucus, the vampire squid pulls my absolute favorite defensive maneuver in the entire animal kingdom.
The behavioral logs call it the pineapple posture.
Yes. It takes those 8 webbed arms and completely inverts them. It flips them backward over its own head and mantle, essentially turning itself inside out.
That is wild.
The menacing-looking spines, the cirri, which were on the inside of the web, are now pointing outward in every direction. It covers its soft eyes and vital organs and transforms its silhouette from a squid into a spiky, bizarre, thoroughly unappetizing ball that closely resembles a pineapple.
Which I think is a massive lesson for you, the listener, as we continue this descent. Our human intuition, which evolved on dry land in bright sunlight, learning to identify the visual cues of lions, wolves, and snakes, is completely useless down here.
Completely useless. Form does not equal function in the ways our terrestrial brains expect. The tiny fish with the transparent teeth is a hyper-aggressive biological assassin, but the giant, red, spiky creature in a cape is a slow-moving, mucus-eating pacifist that turns into a fruit when it gets startled.
It is a vital cognitive shift. In the deep ocean, you must look past the morphology and look at the physical constraints of the environment. The physics dictate the biology, not the other way around.
All right, keeping those physical constraints in mind, we have to keep sinking. We are leaving the dim, bruise-colored twilight zone behind, dropping past the 1,000-meter mark. The pressure is rising, and the environment undergoes a stark, uncompromising transition. We have hit the bathypelagic zone, the midnight zone.
The term midnight is not a poetic exaggeration in this context. It is an absolute physical reality. When you pass 1,000 meters, you cross a boundary where the last possible photons of sunlight are absorbed by the water.
Wow.
Below this line, sunlight has never existed. Not once in the 4.5 billion years of Earth's history has a single ray of the sun touched this water.
Just absolute darkness.
If you were to somehow extinguish every glowing animal, it would be a blackness so complete, so dense, that it is genuinely difficult for the human visual cortex to process. And alongside this permanent darkness, the physical conditions become incredibly extreme.
The two big ones jumping out of the oceanographic data are the temperature and the pressure. The temperature drops to a constant 2 to 4 degrees Celsius, just barely above freezing. But the pressure is the real barrier to entry. At these depths, the weight of the water column above you is immense.
Staggering weight.
The physical oceanography texts calculate the pressure here at roughly 100 atmospheres. To put a visual on that, the researchers compare it to the equivalent weight of a full-grown African elephant standing on every single square inch of your body simultaneously.
It is a crushing, merciless physical reality. And under those conditions, permanent freezing blackness, crushing hydrostatic pressure, and most importantly, an extreme scarcity of caloric resources biology is forced to make terrifying compromises.
Terrifying compromises.
You cannot afford to build biological luxuries in the midnight zone. Every single cell, every single drop of energy must be optimized for sheer survival.
Which brings us to arguably the most famous resident of the deep sea. When most people hear the phrase deep sea monster, this is the exact animal that pops into their head, the anglerfish.
The anglerfish is the perfect embodiment of darkness utilized as architecture. When you picture an anglerfish in your mind, that round, lumpy, almost gelatinous body, the massive underbite bristling with long, inward curving teeth, and the iconic glowing lure suspended on a modified dorsal fin stalk above its head, you are picturing the female anglerfish.
Just the female.
Just the female. And by the standards of the midnight zone, she is a giant. Some species can grow to over 30 centimeters.
Which, as we've established, is a massive investment of biological energy in a place where you might not encounter a meal for months at a time. I was diving into the microbiology of that glowing lure because it isn't just a piece of flesh that magically emits light, it's an entire symbiotic ecosystem.
That is correct. Her lure, called an esca, is not producing its own chemical light like the lanternfish. It is actually a specialized biological bioreactor.
A bioreactor on her head.
Basically. The female anglerfish cultivates a highly specific strain of bioluminescent bacteria inside that lure. She cannot produce the light herself. Instead, she provides a safe, nutrient-rich, perfectly temperature-controlled home for these bacteria. In exchange for room and board, the bacteria provide a constant source of light.
But she doesn't just leave the light on. The neurological studies show she has exquisite control over the blood flow to the lure.
Yes, she does.
By restricting or opening the blood vessels supplying oxygen to those bacteria, she can control their chemical reaction. She can pulse the light, dim it, or flash it in very specific, erratic rhythms that perfectly mimic the twitching movements of a wounded shrimp or a small fish. She has engineered the perfect biological bait.
She sits perfectly still in the freezing blackness using minimal energy and simply lets her prey come to her. But while her hunting strategy is fascinating, it is the reproductive biology of the anglerfish that truly stretches the boundaries of what we understand about vertebrate life.
Oh boy.
Because you correctly noted that the giant, terrifying creature is the female, we need to discuss the male.
The male anglerfish absolutely short-circuited my brain when I was reading the genetic and anatomical papers. Because if she is this 30-centimeter apex predator, the male is microscopic by comparison.
He is minuscule. In many species, the male is barely a centimeter long, tens of times smaller than the female. And his biology is completely stripped down to bare essentials. He has no glowing lure. His digestive system is rudimentary, almost non-functional.
So he can't even hunt.
No. He is not built to survive long-term. From the absolute second he hatches into this pitch-black, freezing, endless void, he is on a rapidly ticking clock. He has exactly one goal.
Yeah.
He must find a female.
And he has to do it in the dark, in an ocean so vast that the odds of bumping into her are statistically almost zero. The anatomical data shows his olfactory organs, his nostrils basically, are massively enlarged. He is literally just a swimming nose, desperately trying to pick up the chemical pheromone trail of a female in the water.
And when he finally, against all mathematical odds, manages to follow that scent and find a female in the darkness, he does not initiate a standard mating ritual. He initiates one of the most extreme biological processes on the planet: sexual parasitism.
Let's walk through the mechanics of this because it is unhinged. He swims up to her massive body and he bites onto her side or her belly. And he doesn't just hold on. The tissue research shows that the moment his teeth sink into her skin, enzymes are released that begin to dissolve the tissue of his mouth and the tissue of her body. His jaw literally melts and fuses into her flesh.
The physical boundaries between the two distinct organisms begin to break down.
Right. The blood vessels in her skin connect with the blood vessels in his face until their circulatory systems physically merge. She starts pumping her blood through his body.
Yes.
And because he is now receiving all his nutrients directly from her bloodstream, he doesn't need his own organs anymore. He loses his eyes, he loses his fins, his internal organs atrophy and dissolve. He completely ceases to be an independent, free-swimming creature and is reduced to a permanent, parasitic lump of flesh attached to her side.
His sole remaining biological function is to act as a permanent, attached sperm bank. Whenever the female manages to secure enough food to generate eggs, she chemically signals the male through their shared bloodstream, and he releases sperm to fertilize them.
That's just wow.
The female never has to waste energy searching for a mate again. And researchers have recovered female specimens from the depths that have not just one, but sometimes up to 6 or 8 of these dissolved, fused males permanently attached to her body.
Okay, I have to stop here and push back on the biology because this is the part that kept me up at night reading this. I understand the evolutionary why. It's hard to find a mate, so when you do, you literally never let them go. But the how completely violates human medical science.
It seems to, yes.
If a human being receives an organ transplant from someone who isn't a perfect genetic match, our immune system immediately recognizes it as a foreign invader and goes to war to destroy it. We have to take powerful immunosuppressant drugs for the rest of our lives. How does a female anglerfish just absorb an entire foreign body, a completely different fish, and fuse blood supplies without her immune system completely violently rejecting him?
That exact question baffled immunologists for decades. It is one of the most profound biological mysteries of the deep sea. When geneticists finally managed to sequence the genome of these anglerfish lineages, they found an answer that is almost more shocking than the parasitism itself.
What did they find?
Vertebrate immune systems are generally divided into 2 parts. Innate immunity, which is the fast, generic response to infections, and adaptive immunity. Adaptive immunity involves T cells and antibodies that recognize specific foreign tissues and attack them. This is what causes organ rejection.
So what did the genome sequencing reveal about the anglerfish?
It revealed that in order to make this fusion possible, the anglerfish lineages that engage in sexual parasitism have functionally deleted major components of their adaptive immune system.
Deleted them?
Yes. They are missing the key genes that produce killer T cells, and they lack the genetic framework to produce targeted antibodies.
Wait, they just threw away their immune system. How do they not instantly die of bacterial infections? The ocean is basically a soup of pathogens.
They rely entirely on a hypercharged version of their innate immune system to fight off infections, a system we don't fully understand yet. But the evolutionary math is clear. They discarded one of the most fundamental biological defense mechanisms that almost all vertebrates share, simply to solve the logistical problem of finding a mate in the dark.
They traded their immune system for guaranteed reproduction.
Exactly. The pressures of the midnight zone are so extreme that they didn't just adapt to the environment. They fundamentally rewrote the genetic rules of what a vertebrate body is allowed to be. They broke the biological definition of a distinct individual.
Rewriting the rules of a body, that perfectly sets up the next creature on our evolutionary tour of the midnight zone, the gulper eel. Because if the anglerfish decided to rewrite the immune system, the gulper eel or the pelican eel seems to have looked at standard fish anatomy and decided that having a normal body is a waste of calories.
It certainly appears that way.
It is essentially just a giant, terrifying mouth wearing a tiny string of a body as an afterthought.
The gulper eel's anatomy is a direct physiological response to the brutal mathematics of the midnight zone. Extreme starvation. Down here, meals are not a daily occurrence. An animal might go many months, perhaps even an entire year, without successfully finding a single piece of food.
Right. So when a meal finally does drift past you in the dark, you absolutely cannot afford to let it go just because it happens to be slightly larger than you are. You can't be a picky eater.
Evolution in this zone does not reward selective hunting. It rewards the absolute, unconditional physical capacity to seize any caloric opportunity that presents itself. To achieve this, the gulper eel has sacrificed almost everything else. It has no pelvic fins, no swim bladder, and very little muscle mass. Its skeleton has been drastically reduced to save energy.
But the skull. The skull is wild. The osteological diagrams show its jaws are loosely hinged, almost disconnected, and they account for a massive percentage of its total length. When it opens its mouth, the lower jaw drops and balloons outward, creating a cavernous scoop that resembles a pelican's pouch.
And this allows the eel to physically swallow prey that is significantly larger and heavier than its own entire body. Once swallowed, the stomach tissue is incredibly elastic, stretching to accommodate the massive meal. The eel will then sink into a state of lethargy, floating motionless for weeks while it slowly digests a meal that might have to sustain it for the next year. It is the ultimate anatomical adaptation for absolute scarcity.
But the midnight zone isn't just about small eels stretching their stomachs or anglerfish waiting quietly in the dark. As I was going through the historical acoustic data in the research, I realized this zone is also the primary battleground for what has to be the most epic, violent, unseen war on the entire planet.
Indeed.
And it's a war between titans, the giant squid versus the sperm whale.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, if we pull back and look at the macroecology of the ocean, It is genuinely staggering to realize that one of the largest predator versus predator conflicts in the history of Earth has been raging continuously for millions of years right in this pitch-black layer, and humanity is almost entirely blind to it.
Let's set the stage for this clash because the physics involved are incredible. You have the sperm whale, a massive air-breathing mammal that can weigh over 40 tons. It takes a deep breath at the sunlit surface and then physically collapses its lungs to deal with the pressure as it dives straight down.
Yes, plummeting.
Plummeting 2,000 meters into the freezing blackness of the midnight zone. The physiology papers confirm they can hold their breath for well over an hour, actively hunting in an environment where they technically shouldn't belong.
Oh.
And they are diving into the abyss specifically to hunt the giant squid.
And the biological weaponry the sperm whale brings into the dark is formidable. Because they are hunting in total blackness, vision is useless. Instead, the sperm whale utilizes the most powerful biological sonar system ever evolved. Echolocation. A massive portion of their enormous blocky head is filled with a specialized organ called the spermaceti organ, filled with waxy oil.
This is the organ the whalers use to harvest for lamp oil, right?
Yes, but biologically, it acts as an acoustic lens. The whale forces air through specialized nasal passages to create incredibly loud, sharp clicks. The spermaceti organ focuses these clicks into a directed, high-intensity sound beam that blasts out into the dark water. The sound waves hit an object like a squid and bounce back to the whale's lower jaw, which channels the echo to its inner ear. The whale can basically see a highly detailed 3D acoustic map of the pitch-black ocean.
And reading the acoustics papers, there is a prevailing theory that these clicks aren't just for seeing. The sound pressure level of a sperm whale click is so immensely loud, over 230 decibels, which is louder than a jet engine at takeoff, that biologists hypothesize they might use rapid bursts of sound at close range to physically stun, paralyze, or disorient the giant squid before they even bite it.
It is a devastating offensive capability. But the giant squid is not defenseless prey. It has evolved its own highly specialized countermeasures. To detect the approaching whale, the giant squid has evolved the largest eyes of any animal that has ever existed on Earth, living or extinct. They are the size of standard dinner plates, roughly 25 to 30 centimeters across.
This was the part that made me stop and reread the paragraph 3 times. If they live at 2,000 meters deep, in a zone we literally just defined by the complete absence of sunlight, what is a dinner plate-sized eye actually looking at?
They are not looking for shapes or colors or sunlight. The physics of an eye, that massive specifically, a pupil the size of an orange and a massive spherical lens, means it is optimized to capture the absolute faintest possible traces of light. In the midnight zone, those massive eyes are highly specialized photon detectors, tuned perfectly to detect bioluminescence.
But wait, sperm whales don't glow. They aren't bioluminescent.
Sperm whales do not glow, but the water they swim through is filled with microscopic bioluminescent plankton. When a 40-ton sperm whale swims aggressively toward a giant squid in the dark, it physically displaces a massive volume of water. The physical turbulence agitates the microscopic plankton, causing them to flash blue in distress.
Oh, wow. So the giant squid is sitting in the dark, and its massive eyes are scanning the blackness, not for the whale itself, but for the glowing bioluminescent silhouette of the water being violently ripped apart by the whale's body. It is looking for the glowing wake of its own death approaching.
Exactly. The eyes give it crucial seconds of early warning. It detects the incoming bioluminescent shockwave, and its massive, thick nerve axons allow it to rapidly contract its mantle and jet away into the dark before the whale's sonar can pinpoint it for a final strike.
That is incredibly cinematic, and the most frustrating part of reading all this research is that this titanic clash is almost entirely unseen by human eyes. We know this war is happening not because we have submarine crews filming it, but because of the forensic aftermath.
For centuries, the only tangible proof marine biologists had of this conflict were the massive circular scars gouged into the thick skin around the mouths and heads of sperm whales when they surfaced to breathe.
The suckers.
Right. The giant squid's tentacles are lined with powerful suckers, and each sucker is ringed with sharp serrated teeth. When the whale bites the squid fights back, wrapping its tentacles around the whale's face and grinding those serrated suckers into the flesh.
The researchers actually used the diameter of those circular scars on the whales to mathematically calculate how big the squids down there must be. And speaking of unseen, the historical timeline in the research points out that the very first video footage ever recorded of a live giant squid in its natural deep sea habitat didn't happen until 2004.
It took that long.
It wasn't until 2004 that a Japanese team finally caught one on camera. We literally had remote-controlled rovers driving around on the surface of Mars collecting rock samples before we managed to get a video of a giant squid swimming in our own ocean.
It highlights the extreme difficulty of operating in the midnight zone. But that profound lack of human observation becomes even more stark when we turn the page in your research stack to consider the colossal squid.
Right. Because the giant squid wasn't terrifying enough, evolution decided to iterate on the design.
The colossal squid, Mesonacateuthis hamiltoni, pushes the biological limits even further. While the giant squid might be slightly longer due to its thin, whip-like tentacles, the colossal squid is believed to be significantly heavier and far more robust. It potentially holds the title for the largest invertebrate on the planet by mass.
Just massive.
And its weaponry is a significant upgrade. Unlike the giant squid, which relies on those serrated suckers we mentioned, the colossal squid's tentacles are armed with actual swiveling three-pointed hooks.
Swiveling hooks, like something designed in a medieval torture chamber.
The hooks can rotate independently, allowing them to dig deeply into the flesh of a predator or large prey item and lock on with mechanical precision. They inhabit the freezing, turbulent, deep waters around Antarctica. Their eyes may be even larger than those of the giant squid, giving them incredible visual acuity in the dark.
Right.
And yet, despite being one of the largest predators on the planet, the number of intact adult specimens ever recovered by science, or the amount of footage we have of them alive in their natural habitat, is vanishingly small.
It is genuinely unsettling when you stop and think about it. It's an animal roughly the size of a city bus, armed with swiveling meat hooks, swimming around right now on our planet, and we basically only know it exists because a few of them accidentally got tangled in long-line fishing nets. We have maps of the atmospheric storms on Jupiter, but we literally do not know what a colossal squid does on a typical Tuesday.
It is a humbling reminder of the sheer three-dimensional volume of the ocean and how effectively the dark and the pressure hide its largest inhabitants.
Unbelievable. Okay, we have to keep moving. We are sinking past the 4,000-meter mark now. The open water columns, the twilight and midnight zones are above us, and we finally hit solid ground. We have reached the seafloor, the abyssal zone.
The word abyssal is derived from the Greek word abyssos, which translates to bottomless. And when you arrive on the abyssal plain, you can immediately understand why the ancients conceptualized it that way. The abyssal plains make up roughly 50% of the Earth's surface.
50%.
They are vast, flat, almost entirely featureless terrains. They are covered in a fine, endless layer of pale, muddy sediment.
The geological surveys say this mud is essentially made of millions of years of microscopic plankton shells that have drifted down from the surface and accumulated over eons. And the pressure down here is now 400 times the surface pressure. It's an environment that the ecology papers constantly compare to a desert. Not because it's dry, obviously, but because the caloric resources are so incredibly sparse.
Very sparse.
By the time food sinks through the 4,000 meters of hungry mouths in the zones above, almost nothing is left. So survival on the abyssal plain requires extreme patience.
Extreme patience, and a metabolic architecture that allows an organism to capitalize immediately and aggressively on very rare, unpredictable windfalls of food.
Which perfectly explains one of the strangest creatures I encountered in this data stack. Imagine you are in a submersible, hovering over this endless underwater mud desert, and suddenly your lights catch something slowly crawling across the bottom. It looks exactly like a pill bug or a roly-poly from your garden, the kind you find under a wet rock. Except this one is heavily armored, pale, and the size of a house cat. The giant isopod.
Bathynomus giganteus. The giant isopod is a classic, fascinating example of an evolutionary phenomenon that has puzzled marine biologists for decades: deep-sea gigantism. When we look across entirely unrelated taxonomic groups, isopods, squid, spider crabs, sea spiders, amphipods, we see a recurring pattern where the DC variants grow exponentially, sometimes gigantically, larger than their shallow water relatives.
Okay, here's where it gets really interesting. I have a theory on this, but I want you to validate the science. Because reading the initial data, it feels like a paradox. If the abyssal plain is a desert with no food, shouldn't evolutionary pressure force them to be small? Smaller bodies require fewer calories to maintain. Why get big when you are starving?
That is exactly the central paradox of deep-sea gigantism, and it is a subject of active debate among physiologists. There isn't one single consensus, but rather three competing, interrelated theories.
Okay, what's the first one?
The first relies on temperature and metabolism, drawing on something called Kleiber's law and Bergmann's rule. The near-freezing temperatures on the abyssal plain drastically slow down cellular metabolic rates. Because they grow so slowly and expend so little energy, their lifespans are vastly extended. They simply live long enough to keep molting and growing to enormous sizes over decades.
So because it's cold, they live longer and just never stop growing.
That is one theory. The second theory focuses on dissolved oxygen. In shallow, warm water, oxygen solubility is lower. A crustacean can only grow so large before its gills can no longer extract enough oxygen to support its tissue mass. But in the near-freezing, high-pressure environment of the abyss, water can hold significantly more dissolved oxygen.
And that removes a limit.
This physical change removes the respiratory limit, allowing their bodies to physically scale up.
Extra oxygen physically permits larger bodies. What's the third theory?
The third is purely ecological, involving the absence of predation. In a shallow coral reef, a moderately large, slow-moving, heavily armored crustacean is a very easy target for fast-moving visual predators like groupers or sharks. But on the abyssal plain, that specific niche of fast, mid-sized predators is largely empty. There isn't enough food to support them. Therefore, the isopods are free to evolve larger body sizes to cover more ground searching for food without the evolutionary penalty of being easily eaten. What makes gigantism so fascinating is that these might not be mutually exclusive. They might be separate evolutionary pressures that all synthesize to produce the same physical outcome.
To me, the most fascinating part of the giant isopod isn't just its size, it's how its metabolism handles the famine. Because they live in this desert, they have adapted to starvation in a way that sounds superhuman. The metabolic studies in the research stack note that giant isopods kept in captive observation tanks have been documented going for over 4 entire years without eating a single piece of food. 4 years.
They achieve this through extreme metabolic suppression. They can enter a state of near-suspended animation, lowering their heart rate and caloric requirements to an absolute baseline to outlast the famine.
But the flip side of that coin is what happens when food finally does arrive. Say a dead fish or a piece of squid finally sinks to the bottom. The behavioral logs say the isopods completely lose their minds. They swarm the food and gorge themselves so aggressively, eating so much tissue so incredibly fast that their segmented armored exoskeleton physically bulges outward, and they can literally lose the ability to walk. They eat themselves into a temporary paralyzed food coma.
It is the ultimate boomer-bust lifestyle. From a biological perspective, it is entirely rational. The isopod has no sensory data to tell it whether its next meal is coming tomorrow or in another 4 years. Therefore, the only logical evolutionary strategy is to maximize caloric intake to absolute physical capacity the moment the opportunity arises.
And speaking of a massive windfall of calories arriving on the abyssal plain, reading through these deep-sea ecology papers, we have to talk about the granddaddy of all deep-sea windfalls. What happens when a whale dies?
The phenomenon of a whale fall is recognized as one of the most remarkable and complex localized ecological events on the planet. When a massive cetacean, like a blue whale or a humpback, dies in the open ocean, it may float for a time, but eventually it sinks. It falls through the twilight zone, past the midnight zone, until the multi-ton carcass crashes into the desolate sediment of the abyssal plain.
And this event essentially drops the equivalent of an atomic bomb of nutrients into a desert that might not have seen a substantial meal in decades.
Exactly. It completely disrupts the local ecology, initiating a highly predictable multi-stage succession of life. Within hours of the whale hitting the bottom, the first stage begins. The mobile scavenger stage.
That's the sleeper sharks and isopods?
Yes. Scavengers like sleeper sharks, hagfish, and our friends, the giant isopods, can detect the chemical plume of the decaying flesh drifting on the slow deep-sea currents from miles away. They converge on the carcass in a massive feeding frenzy. This stage can strip hundreds of thousands of pounds of soft tissue, blubber, and muscle from the whale in a matter of months.
The speed of that scavenger stage is wild, but digging into the microbiology papers in the stack, it's what happens after the meat is completely gone that is truly mind-blowing. The scavengers leave, and just the massive white skeleton is left sitting on the mud, and that's when the Osedax worms arrive.
The genus Osedax literally translates from Latin as bone-eating, and they are phenomenally bizarre, highly specialized creatures.
Okay, let's break down exactly how bizarre they are, because this challenges the basic definition of an animal. They are worms that survive exclusively by eating whale bones, but the anatomical charts clearly show they have no mouth, they have no stomach, they have absolutely no intestinal tract or digestive system at all. So how on earth is a mouthless worm extracting calories from a solid piece of whale bone?
They utilize a completely unique synergistic biological tool set. Instead of a mouth, the base of the Osedax worm has evolved these green, fleshy, root-like structures.
It's plant roots.
Yes. The roots secrete a powerful acid that chemically dissolves the calcium matrix of the whalebone, allowing the worm to bore deep inside. But the acid doesn't digest the food. Inside these root structures is an organ called a trophozoan, which is packed tightly with a specific strain of symbiotic bacteria.
Ah, so it's a partnership.
Exactly. The whalebones are filled with rich lipids, fats, and oils trapped deep inside the marrow. The worm bores into the bone and absorbs these complex fats, but it can't digest them. It passes the fats to the bacteria living in its roots. The bacteria break down the fats into usable energy, and the worm simply absorbs the metabolic byproducts the bacteria produce. The worm provides the drill and the raw materials. The bacteria act as the stomach.
It's like they plant themselves like an alien tree into a skeleton and let bacteria do the chewing. Anyway, going back to my notes on the reproduction, the genetic papers mention it again here. The miniaturized males, just like the anglerfish we talked about.
A recurring theme.
The worms boring into the bone are entirely female, and they have these microscopic males basically living as internal parasites inside their tubes.
It highlights how the deep sea produces convergent evolutionary solutions. Finding a mate on the abyssal plane is difficult enough, but finding a mate that is specifically located on a transient, temporary resource like a whale skeleton is a logistical nightmare. The target is infinitesimally small in the grand scale of the ocean floor. So if a female Osidex worm manages to colonize a bone, the males cannot afford to wander around looking for her. When male larvae land on a female, they arrest their own development, remain microscopic, and settle inside her tube to act as a permanent sperm supply.
It's just wild how often the deep sea forces that specific compromise. And this whole process, the acid, the bacteria breaking down the marrow, it alters the chemistry of the water around the skeleton. The ecological timeline calls this the sulfophilic stage.
Yes, the sulfur-loving stage. As the lipids in the bone are broken down anaerobically by bacteria, they produce hydrogen sulfide as a byproduct. This hydrogen sulfide seeps out of the bones and feeds entirely different, dense mats of chemoautotrophic bacteria that grow over the skeleton.
Creating a whole new ecosystem.
Exactly. These bacterial mats then provide the foundation for an entirely new food web of specialized crabs, snails, limpets, and other organisms. A single whale carcass can sustain this localized, bustling metropolis of highly specialized life in the middle of the desert for 20, 30, even up to 50 years.
50 years. One death at the surface, creating a half-century of bustling life at the bottom. But reading that timeline really made me stop. I want to push back on this from a historical human perspective. We want to be clear that we aren't taking any political sides here. We are just looking at the data presented in the sources regarding the ecological impacts. We know from the records that during the peak of the global commercial whaling industry in the 19th and 20th centuries, humans hunted certain large whale species to the absolute brink of extinction. We physically removed millions of massive whales from the oceans. If these deep-sea ecosystems, the Osidax worms, the specialized crabs, rely entirely on the steady rhythm of these massive carcasses falling to the abyssal plain, and we spend a century stopping the whales from falling, are we unknowingly causing massive, invisible extinction events in the deep sea without ever even knowing those ecosystems were there?
That is an incredibly astute and profoundly concerning scientific question. It is a major area of study for deep-sea ecologists today. When humanity thinks about extinction, we usually frame it as a direct consequence. We hunt the buffalo disappears. But ecology is a highly complex, interconnected web.
Everything is connected.
Yes. If highly specialized lineages of Osidax worms evolved over millions of years to rely entirely on the consistent density of whale falls, then drastically reducing the surface whale population increases the physical distance between carcasses on the seafloor. If the distance becomes too great for the microscopic larvae to drift before starving, the population collapses. Removing the whales from the sunlit surface almost certainly cause invisible, secondary mass extinctions in the permanent dark. It proves that we are inextricably connected to the deepest points of this planet, and our actions can sever those ecological connections before we even understand the damage we've done.
That is a deeply sobering thought, and the intensity of our human impact only becomes more apparent as we make our final drop. We are leaving the vast, flat, abyssal plains. We are sinking past 6,000 meters, aiming for the absolute bottom, plunging down to 11,000 meters. We are entering the Hadal Zone.
Named after Hades, the Greek god of the underworld. The Hadal Zone is geologically distinct from the rest of the ocean. It does not cover the broad ocean floor. It exists almost exclusively inside deep-sea trenches, these massive, narrow, canyon-like scars carved deeply into the Earth's crust. They are formed at subduction zones, where massive tectonic plates are violently colliding, and one plate is being slowly, relentlessly forced underneath the other, dragging the seafloor down with it.
We are talking about the absolute razor-edge limits of biology here. The deepest known point is Challenger Deep, located at the southern end of the Mariana Trench, nearly 11,000 meters down. To put that staggering depth into perspective, the geographical data points out that if you took Mount Everest, the tallest mountain on Earth, and dropped it base first into Challenger Deep, the absolute peak of Everest would still be submerged under more than a mile of water.
The scale is immense, and the physical pressure at that depth is almost inconceivable. It is over 1,100 times the atmospheric pressure we feel at sea level. The pressure is so immense that water itself, which is generally considered incompressible, actually compresses slightly, increasing in density. For decades, the ironclad scientific consensus was that complex vertebrate life, fish, simply could not exist at these depths.
Right, I was reading the historical physiology papers, and there was a theoretical hard limit established. Scientists believe that once you passed about 8,200 meters, the hydrostatic pressure would be so overwhelmingly immense that the literal proteins inside a fish's cellular structure would deform and crush. The biochemistry required for a vertebrate to live would just physically stop working.
That was the widely accepted biochemical threshold, until an expedition in 2017 shattered it.
Enter the Mariana snailfish.
Yes. In 2017, marine biologists deployed autonomous deep-sea landers equipped with bait and high-definition cameras into the Mariana Trench. And they captured clear, undeniable footage of a living, actively swimming fish at a depth of 8,178 meters, right on the bleeding edge of that theoretical limit. And subsequent expeditions have spotted them even slightly deeper, pushing right against the 8,200-meter wall.
Okay, so how does it survive? If its proteins are supposed to be squished into useless jelly at that depth, how is it swimming around?
Well, structurally, it survives partly by being jelly. When you think of a fish surviving extreme pressure, you might imagine something heavily armored, with thick scales and dense bones. The snailfish is the exact opposite. It's a small, pale pink, almost entirely translucent, and extremely soft and gelatinous. It has no scales, and its skeleton is highly reduced, mostly composed of flexible cartilage rather than calcified bone.
So it just flexes.
Yes, it survives the pressure by refusing to fight it. It remains entirely flexible, allowing the internal and external pressure to equalize and distribute evenly through its water-filled tissues, rather than trying to build a rigid structural wall against it that would inevitably crack.
That makes sense from a macroscopic physical engineering standpoint, but what about the microscopic level? How do its proteins not collapse?
That is where the biochemical adaptations are truly miraculous. Geneticists have sequenced the snailfish genome and analyzed their tissue chemistry. They discovered that the snailfish utilizes a chemical called apicellite, specifically a molecule called trimethylamine anoxide, or TMAO.
TMAO, how does that protect a protein?
Under extreme pressure, water molecules are forced tightly together and they start to crush the delicate, folded structures of cellular proteins, preventing them from functioning. TMAO essentially acts as a chemical scaffolding. It strongly binds to the water molecules inside the fish's cells, forcing them into a rigid protective lattice structure around the proteins. It physically props the water away from the protein, preserving the protein's shape and function under the crushing weight. The deeper a fish lives, the more TMAO it needs in its tissues.
And wait, the research notes mention that TMAO is the chemical that gives dead fish their fishy smell when it breaks down, right?
Exactly. Deep-sea fish smell incredibly pungent when brought to the surface because their tissues are absolutely saturated with this stabilizing chemical. It is a biochemical triumph. And, unsurprisingly, given the energy required to maintain this chemistry, the snailfish have completely abandoned the biological cost of eyesight. At 8,000 meters in a trench, building an eye is a total waste of cellular energy.
But the wild thing I found in the trench data is that 8,200 meters really does seem to be the absolute limit for fish. Even with TMAO, vertebrate biology eventually fails. But life itself keeps going, all the way down to the very bottom of the trench, 11,000 meters deep.
Past the point where vertebrate biochemistry fails, life simply changes its form. At the very bottom of Challenger Deep, the bait landers have discovered dense swarms of small, scavenging, shrimp-like crustaceans called amphipods.
And these amphipods have a crazy survival trick to deal with the trench environment, right? The geochemical papers say they actually extract metal from the mud to coat their shells.
Yes, it is an astonishing adaptation to a highly specific chemical threat. The extreme pressure at the bottom of these trenches actually changes the chemistry of the seawater, making it more acidic and highly corrosive to calcium carbonate, which is the standard building block for crustacean shells. To prevent their exoskeletons from literally dissolving into the water under the pressure, these amphipods extract trace amounts of aluminum ions that are naturally dissolved in the trench sediment. They incorporate this aluminum directly into their exoskeletons, essentially building a specialized metallic armor to survive the corrosive chemistry of the deep.
They are building metal armor out of the mud. Nature's engineering is just unbelievable, but there is a really dark twist to the story of these amphipods in the research stack, isn't there? This is the part of the data that legitimately upset me when I was reading it. Again, we were just imparting the facts from the toxicology reports found in the sources.
It is a dark twist, and it serves as a profound, undeniable indictment of our global human footprint. When researchers first managed to bring up physical samples of these amphipods from the very bottom of Challenger Deep, the most remote, inaccessible, extreme location on the face of the Earth, they analyzed the chemical composition of their tissues to understand their biology. And inside the bodies of these creatures, they found extraordinarily high concentrations of man-made industrial pollutants.
Specifically, the toxicology reports highlight legacy chemicals, banned chemicals used in electrical insulation and coolants that haven't been widely manufactured since the 1970s.
Polychlorinated biphenyls, or PCBs, along with microplastics. These toxic chemicals were released into the surface environment decades ago. They bind to organic matter, to the marine snow we discussed earlier, and begin a decades-long relentless descent. They fall through the twilight zone, pass through the midnight zone, drift across the abyssal plain, and slowly funnel down the steep walls of the subduction trenches, accumulating at the very bottom. Because they do not break down naturally, they biomagnify in the food chain. The amphipods eat the contaminated debris, and the toxins concentrate in their fat stores.
So our pollution, our toxic industrial garbage, literally won the race to the absolute bottom of the Earth. It got there before our explorers ever did.
It is a sobering reality. There is no place on this planet, no matter how deep or how hostile, that is untouched by human activity.
That is just... it's devastating. But before we let that heavy realization close out the deep dive, I want to pivot to one final stop on our descent in the research stack. Because there is a discovery hidden in the deep ocean that doesn't just change how we view marine biology, it profoundly changes how we view the entire universe and our place in it.
We're talking about the discovery of hydrothermal vents.
Let's set the historical scene for this because it's a massive paradigm shift. It is 1977.
Prior to the year 1977, there was one unbreakable fundamental rule in all of biology. Every single ecosystem, every single food chain on Earth, without exception, was believed to originate with the sun. Plants, algae, and phytoplankton capture sunlight, perform photosynthesis to create chemical energy, and then everything else on the planet, cows eating grass, lions eating cows, human beings eating everything, even the deep-sea isopods eating marine snow, is just utilizing recycled energy that was originally derived from that sunlight. The dogma was absolute. No sun, no life.
But then, a team of geologists in a deep-sea submersible called Alvin is exploring a mid-ocean ridge near the Galapagos Islands, over 2,500 meters down in the pitch black.
They're looking for geological activity, tectonic spreading centers, and they discover these towering, alien-looking underwater chimneys made of dark rock. These chimneys are violently spewing out mineral-rich black water that has been heated by the Earth's magma beneath the crust. The thermal probes measure the water exiting these vents at temperatures exceeding 370 degrees Celsius.
Which is incredibly hot. It's hot enough to melt lead. The only reason it isn't instantly flashing into steam and exploding is because the immense hydrostatic pressure of the deep ocean physically forces it to remain in a liquid state.
Exactly. The extreme physics are fascinating. But it wasn't the geology or the temperature that shocked the scientific world. It was what was living directly on top of the vents. In this pitch black, lethally hot, incredibly toxic chemical environment, the geologists found dense, thriving, massive communities of biological life. There was more life clustered in a few square meters around these vents than almost anywhere else on the deep sea floor.
And remember the foundational rule, there is absolutely no sunlight here. None. So the immediate screaming question the biologists had was, how are these massive communities surviving without the sun?
The answer fundamentally rewrote textbooks. The researchers discovered a biological process called chemosynthesis. Instead of using photons of sunlight to power the creation of energy, highly specialized strains of bacteria living at these vents had evolved the ability to extract chemical energy directly from the toxic inorganic compounds dissolved in the scalding vent fluid.
Specifically, hydrogen sulfide, right, a chemical that smells like rotting eggs and would instantly poison and kill almost any other animal on Earth.
Yes. Through chemosynthesis, these bacteria oxidize the hydrogen sulfide, combining it with carbon dioxide and oxygen in the water to produce organic carbohydrates. They essentially eat lethal poison and turn it into the foundational energy source for a completely independent, complex food web. A food web that has been running parallel to our sun-based world for potentially billions of years, entirely self-sustained in the dark.
And the physical creatures that have evolved to live off this bacterial energy are incredible. The biology papers detail these giant tube worms, Riftia pachyptila. They grow over 2 meters long. They look like giant white tubes with bright red lipstick protruding from the top. And just like the Otsidax worms we talked about earlier, they have no mouth or stomach.
They're an exquisite example of deep-sea symbiosis. The tube worm's red plume acts as a massive gill, extracting hydrogen sulfide, oxygen, and carbon dioxide directly from the vent water. Now, hydrogen sulfide normally binds to hemoglobin and prevents oxygen transport, which is why it's toxic to blooded animals. But the tube worms have evolved a highly specialized form of hemoglobin that can bind to both oxygen and hydrogen sulfide simultaneously without being poisoned. The worm transports these chemicals deep into its body to a specialized organ called a trophosome, where billions of chemosynthetic bacteria live. That bacteria manufacture the food, and the worm absorbs it.
It is a perfect, self-contained biological engine, and swarming all around these giant tube worms are thousands of specialized blind vent shrimp. Because they live in total darkness, they don't need eyes. But they desperately need to avoid swimming too close to the vent opening and being instantly boiled alive by the 370-degree water. So they have evolved specialized thermal sensing organs across their backs. They physically see the heat gradient in the water, allowing them to graze on the bacteria while hovering exactly on the millimeter-thin safe boundary line between freezing ocean and boiling vent fluid.
It is a delicate, deadly dance in the dark. And as you mentioned earlier, this raises an important question. Or rather, it forces us to ask new ones. Because finding complex life thriving on chemosynthesis at hydrothermal vents didn't just revolutionize oceanography, it completely revolutionized the field of astrobiology.
I love this connection in the research. Because for decades, when astronomers aimed their telescopes at the stars searching for extraterrestrial life, they were operating under that old biological rule. They were looking for one very specific thing, an Earth-like rocky planet sitting in what they call the Goldilocks zone, exactly the right distance from its host star to have liquid surface water and, crucially, sunlight to power photosynthesis. We assumed finding an alien sun was the strict prerequisite for finding alien life.
But the discovery of the hydrothermal vents in 1977 proved unequivocally that the sun is optional. Life does not require a star. It simply requires a chemical energy gradient and liquid water. That realization shifted the entire scientific paradigm for the search for life in the universe. Suddenly, we realized that an ocean world could be entirely encased in a crust of ice miles thick, orbiting far away from the warming rays of a star, sitting in total freezing darkness. And as long as that world had an active rocky core generating internal heat and creating hydrothermal vents at the bottom of its hidden pitch-black ocean, it could theoretically support a massive, thriving, complex ecosystem of chemosynthetic life.
Which takes the search for alien life and points a massive neon arrow directly at our own cosmic backyard, our own solar system. We look at ice moons like Jupiter's Europa or Saturn's Enceladus. We have data from space probes confirming they have massive liquid subsurface oceans beneath their icy crusts, and the chemical signatures strongly suggest they have active hydrothermal activity at their cores.
The implications are staggering. Finding alien life might not require waiting for a radio signal from a distant star system thousands of light years away. It might simply require building a probe capable of landing on a moon in our own solar system, drilling through a few miles of ice and finding another vent. The first aliens we encounter might just be the extraterrestrial equivalent of chemosynthetic tube worms, waiting quietly in the dark.
That is just, it gives me chills. Unbelievable. Okay, we have to pull ourselves back up to the surface. Our oxygen is running low on this descent. Let's take a breath and summarize the sheer biological madness we've just witnessed as we dug through this research today. We started just below the sunlit surface, watching lanternfish weaponize the physics of light to hide, while dragonfish hacked the visual spectrum to hunt them with invisible red lasers. We dropped into the crushing pressure of the midnight zone and saw anglerfish literally melting their bodies together and deleting their immune systems to survive the freezing dark. We watched giant isopods gorge themselves into paralysis in the abyssal mud desert, and mouthless, bone-eating worms build bustling cities on the sunken skeletons of whales. We found gelatinous snails with mutant, water-bending proteins pushing the absolute physical limits of life in the deepest trenches. And finally, we found communities of life that broke the ultimate rule and survived without the sun at all. And yet, the final staggering statistic in this massive stack of oceanographic data hits you like a truck. Even after all of the incredible discoveries we just talked about, over 80% of the deep ocean is still completely unmapped, unobserved, and unexplored.
80% of the single largest livable space on planet Earth. It is a sobering metric. Every single mind-bending creature, every biochemical miracle we've discussed today was discovered essentially by accident, as our tiny submersibles blindly stumbled around with flashlights in the immense dark over the last few decades. We have barely scratched the surface of the abyss.
So what does this all mean?
I think synthesizing all this data leads us to a profound and slightly haunting final thought. As a species, humanity is deeply obsessed with aiming our telescopes outward, desperately scanning the cosmos, hoping to find an alien world, hoping to find biological rules that are completely different from our own. But the truest, most radically alien world we know of, a place operating on entirely different biochemical physics, is literally 11 kilometers straight down beneath our own boats. And the tragic irony of our era is that, as we saw vividly with the PCBs accumulating in the amphipods in the Mariana Trench, or the potential loss of whale-fall ecosystems, we are fundamentally chemically altering this alien world before we've even had the chance to properly meet it.
That is the exact thought I want you, the listener, to mull over as we end this deep dive. Because if our industrial chemicals are already deeply embedded in the cellular tissue of creatures living at the absolute deepest, most remote bottom of Challenger Deep, what else is happening down there right now? What miraculous rule-breaking biology? What potential medical cures? What entirely different evolutionary paths are we quietly destroying in the dark before human eyes ever even get the chance to witness them?
We are rapidly changing the ending of an evolutionary story that we haven't even finished reading the first chapter of. The deep ocean has been keeping these biological secrets for longer than humanity has existed. And the reality is, it is keeping more of them right now than it has ever shown us.
And somewhere down there, right at this exact second, under thousands of meters of crushing, freezing, pitch-black water, something absolutely impossible is happening that no human being has ever seen. The deepest mystery in the universe was never out there in the stars. It has always been right here, waiting in the dark. Imagine a place where there has never been a day. We finally know a little bit about what lives there, but the rest is up to us to protect before it's gone.